Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Sonic 3D Blast. In the last part, we cleared Volcanic Valley and whatever the name of the ice level was, getting our final Chaos Emerald in the process. And now we're moving on to the last normal level of the game, so to speak, Gene Gadget. I love the song here. I generally love techno beat-y kind of songs to begin with. The Mega Man X Command Mission soundtrack might be one of my favorite soundtracks on the GameCube slash PS2 slash Xbox, but as it is for the level, this is by and large a mechanical electric themed level. There are fans that will push you up into the air, there's more warp pipes that take you from one linear section to the next. There's also panels that look a lot like the spike panels on First Inspection from Spring Stadium, but when you stand on them, spikes don't jut out, instead you get zapped with electricity. And obviously, that hurts. With that said, something I learned only a few playthroughs ago, I believe, is if you stand on them with the blue shield, you will not get hurt. The blue shield sort of acts like the electric shield from Sonic 3 Knuckles alongside every other Sonic game after that, really, and prevents you from getting hurt on those. So as long as you have one of these blue shields, you're relatively safe from most of this stage. The only thing that'll actively be super annoying at that point is either them placing these pufferfish enemies on top of the electric panels, or the rotating cannons. The rotating cannons there being the super annoying mechanic. Now, as for this stage's bio, right out of the manual, this mexed up mecha zone is chock full of pipes, tubes, and wiring. Not to mention electrified floors, shocking beam weapons, and industrial fans that'll blow Sonic away. You know, some of these bios are kind of like, here's a bit of character for the zone, but some of them are also just, here's things you'll face. It's just a list. Which is pretty typical of the era, really. Sometimes you just get nothing to really work off of, and you can only really list what a place is. Now, this stage does have easily some of the most annoying platforming in the game, be it due to some odd placements of slopes, the momentum not exactly working in your favor, or in at least one case, missing a jump requiring at least a minute plus of backtracking, if you're not familiar with the stage. So be careful about your footing around here, because if you mess up, that could be a mighty retrek. Also, due to the placement of the electric panels, be careful about getting hit more than usual too, because that means your flickies can land on the electric panels, just leading to you getting comboed over and over and over again on the single electric platform. Now, by and large, I call this the last normal level because the final zone in the game, Panic Puppet, that we'll be seeing in about 8 minutes, maybe? I'm not sure the exact timer on that. Still functions the same platforming-wise, but in terms of a major mechanic, something is definitively different there. Now, I believe I already mentioned earlier in the LP that a beta version of this game's boss theme would later be used in Sonic 4 Episode 1, but Sonic 4 is not the only game to reuse some music from this game. Certain tracks show up in remixed form, admittedly, across games like Sonic Adventure 1, namely part of the Twinkle Park theme, namely the racetrack is, I think, a part of the Genesis Panic Puppet theme? Question mark? Or maybe it was the Genesis Gene Gadget theme. I can't quite recall. One of the two. I think there's a remix somewhere in Shadow the Hedgehog, but I don't like to think about that game's soundtrack because it's basically non-existent outside of being the same butt rock over and over again. Except for the ending themes. The credits themes of that game are fantastic stuff. I want to say they used some in Sonic Chronicles The Dark Brotherhood, but those are some of the songs that ended up missing instruments due to their poor choices with song making for that game, and of course Sonic Generations. And admittedly, if there's anything I think from either version of 3D Blast that should often be looked back at, it is the music. Because while the two soundtracks are radically different, they are still good stuff. Also, here's the platform I'm talking about. Here we're on a giant steep hill, and there are badniks we need to get the flickies out of. Up, down, and sideways, basically alternating between the right and left sides of the giant hill. If you fall down the hill, it's not instant kill from memory, you just have to backtrack up to the top and find your way back down, which if you're not familiar with the level design, can take about a minute, maybe more. And if you mess up again, then you have to do that all over again. Take your time here. Don't. It's times like this where Sonic's speed really shows that he's not meant for that kind of precise platforming. Like, Sonic's platforming type has had precise jumps, but not in the same way of, like, a Mario or Mega Man game. They usually just have you build up speed to clear wider gaps or use the mechanics with your speed alongside unique stage hazards to make going around bottomless pits or hazards more of a risk versus reward type of scenario. In this game, it just doesn't feel like his speed is built for it at all. I almost feel like, at least with the level designs of stages like Gene Gadget, that slowing down Sonic, not quite to the extent of Sonic Labyrinth, but something similar, may have actually helped them out in terms of pure game design standpoints. It still would have made for a relatively mediocre Sonic game, but oh well. Now we're coming up on a bit of an odd part of the game here. We have these spike hazards here that have fans placed in front of them. The fans do not hold you high enough for you to just hover over the spikes. You need to actively time a jump over both the fans and the spikes to get over them. And it's like the only time they do that in this stage, let alone in the game, and it just kind of stands out as an odd platforming instance. Speaking of odd platforming, though, coming up on one of my least favorite jump sets in the game here, this smaller steep hill, I guess it's just because the angle feels less normal to me than traveling bottom left to top right with the isometric platforming, but I have some shit luck with that jump up there. Thankfully, if you build up some momentum, you can just skip it with the spring, but I was there for about 2 minutes, maybe, somewhere about there. Oh no, Flicky, no! Flicky AI is my enemy. And now I have to do that again! Thankfully, I think I get that relatively quickly this time. Oh, it's so close! Come here, platform, no! This game controls well. Smile. Yes and no, actually. Like I mentioned, the speed doesn't feel right at times, but Sonic, in terms of when he actively responds to your controls, is very sharp. The only thing he has is that his turning can be a bit slow sometimes, and I think that's by and large by intention, at least back in the day before the director's cut changed that a little bit. I think he turns faster in that version. With that, though, we're done with Gene Gadget's stages. It's time for the boss fight, which is one of the longer ones in the game, probably my least favorite, period. It reminds me of a certain minigame from, I think, Mario Party 4 or 6. I can't remember which one of the two. It's one of the two I had growing up. But we're on a giant conveyor belt that leads towards spikes. Eggman stays towards the edge, and the conveyor belt, as he moves, slowly leaks out some spike platforms to try and get you to avoid him. Every now and then, Eggman will dive down, either to try and do a sweep into you, or to shoot the gun on the bottom of his Eggmobile. When he dives down, jump into him, avoid the spikes, and you're good. With that said, a bit of a trick you can use. Whenever you're on a conveyor belt like this, at least in the Saturn version, the way Sonic tries to move with the conveyor belt is that he's moved backwards from whichever direction he's facing, as long as it is in the same rough direction, so to speak. So if you face diagonally perpendicular to the direction of the conveyor belt, you'll just get moved backwards into the bottom left slowly, and you'll kind of just gain some friction against the back wall here, meaning you'll just move back super slowly. This leaves you open to hitting Eggman pretty easily. Plus, the placement of the spike platforms that come out of the conveyor belt are random, so you might not have to jump at all to avoid them should the game be kind to you in that case. Otherwise, this boss, it's easy. It's just tedious. Thankfully, it's done, and now we're moving on to what is technically the final zone in the game. The reason I say technically is, after this zone, if you have all 7 Chaos Emeralds, you go to technically a different zone for the final boss, but it's the final standard stage. Welcome to Panic Puppet. And Panic Puppet works a little bit differently from every other zone in the game. There are no, well, there are straight up badnik enemies in here, but none of them have flickies. Flickies are instead placed in little tubes like the one I just collected, and you need to find them in in every section, all 5 of them, in order to progress. There's also switches that activate when you step on them. To change the direction of certain variables you need to use in order to move on. Admittedly, I think the canisters that contain the flickies can be a bit hard to see, at least in the Saturn version due to the extra graphical detail, so points to the Genesis version, I recall it being easier to find them in that one. But I do appreciate something different in this game's setup. Also another really good song. As for Panic Puppet's bio in the manual, looks like Robotnik hasn't even had time to place the flickies into robots here. Sonic must be catching up to that evil genius. Bounce on the containers to free the flickies inside and make sure to avoid the bubble guns infesting the area. Not for nothing, I appreciate them being like, yeah, this zone's gonna be a little different, look out for that, because I can imagine some people who didn't read the manual being a little confused at first. Oh! Right there is another problem with the slope physics in this game. The moment you're on a slope, your momentum almost feels like it goes negative. And because of that, when you try to jump away, you'll just go flying the opposite direction. I don't like that. It feels weird. It might be more physically accurate, but when has Sonic the Hedgehog ever cared about real-life physics? What do you mean one of the biggest complaints about Sonic 4 Episode 1 was bad physics? Shut up! There's also teleport tubes like in the previous stages, but this time they try to trick you by having some that loop around to backwards in the stage, so you need to be pretty careful about when you progress where in this stage. Like, I actually went the wrong way there. I wanted to go to a different teleporter down here, or is this just where one of the flickies is? I can't quite remember off the top of my head right now. You know, I can't help but wonder, though. Obviously, this game's already a bit different to begin with. What would have happened if this game had some sort of multiplayer features? I doubt they could do multiplayer, like, storyline stuff without having some real crunchy split screen. But maybe like a collect as many flickies as you can in a race type of scenario, or dare I say weird special stage versus stuff like they did back in Sonic 2? There's probably not much you could do with that, honestly. There are some games where multiplayer just isn't needed or should not be implemented because it would probably overcomplicate things, and this is definitely one of those cases. With that said, if memory serves, we're already at the end of the act. Only 5 flickies in this stage, so it's relatively short to complete. And that immediately leads us into yet another pretty unique stage by the game standards, Panic Puppet Act 2. Whereas Act 1 forgoes the usual formula of the game and says, hey, you know those flickies? They're in tubes now. Go find them. Screw the enemies. You don't need them. Act 2 decides to go, hey, you know those flickies you've been collecting the entire game? No more. There are no flickies to rescue in this stage. Your entire goal is to reach the end of the level. In a way, it's the closest to a straight-up Sonic stage the game has had. And like I mentioned in Director's Cut on that rebalance by the original creator, you now can do this for every stage, and you need to do this in order to get 100%. And I admit, the game's control and level design isn't the most well-built for this, but it definitely feels more natural for the game like this. Like, maybe it's just because it is Sonic and your brain expects to be able to move fast and rapidly. Oh god, that's nightmare fuel. To just go through the level design, so not having to track things down probably just makes it feel better. At the same time, though, the level design, this level is like the only one designed with this kind of speed in mind, so it could also just be the fact that this level is the best design for Sonic's movement. Also, again, real good song here. I forget if the Genesis version had a unique song for both acts, but the Saturn version does, and they're both real good. Now, you do Panic Puppet, whether or not you've gotten every single Chaos Emerald in the game. Where the Chaos Emerald split happens is after the boss fight of Panic Puppet. So in the case you have all 6 at this point, or all 7, you're good. And again, if you're playing the Director's Cut, they added Tails and Knuckles into both Panic Puppet and Gene Gadget so you can get all 7 Chaos Emeralds, 1 per zone. And now we're on to the Panic Puppet boss fight, which would be the longest boss fight in the game if it wasn't for the true final boss. Eggman this time around forgoes movement and says, what if I just put myself in many tanks? Phase 1 of the fight, he's in a punching robot, so to speak, that raises its fists in the ground, hovers above you, and if you stay below it long enough, will slam it down. At which point, the blue light on the shoulder of the arms glows. You need to damage it by jumping into it, and after enough of those, one hand will die. Do this for both hands, and that phase is over. And there are 3 phases that are, by and large, the same. It's just the weapon he's using changes a bit. If you're out of range of his hands, he tends to use his little shoulder cannons that fire out in really awkward angles and are honestly probably less effective than the arms at the end of the day. I admit, it's a long boss, but at least it's something more unique for the game's mechanics thus far, because by and large, every boss fight felt very samey. Phase 2 has 2 patrolling fire guns that fire at you, and it's the same fire from the Volcano Valley boss fight in that it tracks you. With that said, unlike the hands, the guns here, I believe, alternate which one is firing, so you need to make sure you head from the left to the right, to the left to the right, all that jazz until the phase is over. Now, as for how the game's endings work, and we'll see this again in a moment, if you have all 7 Chaos Emeralds like I do here in the main footage, and you beat the Panic Puppet boss fight, you're thrown into the true final boss. If you have 6 or less Chaos Emeralds, though, you automatically get the bad ending upon finishing this boss fight. So we're going to do a quick black screen after this boss fight and then show that off. Phase 3 is kind of a logical step up from the last phase. More guns that alternate fire left to right and just move left to right, but whereas the last one, whereas the last phase fired fire that tracked onto you, this fires bubbles that bounce all over the place randomly. And it is honestly probably harder to avoid just because of that alone. So hey, at least they scaled the difficulty of the phases right, I guess. With that said, just waiting beneath the light you need to hit leaves the boss more than open to attack and honestly makes it still pretty easy, although the hit detection can be a bit of a thing from time to time. And that's the Panic Puppet boss fight. So once we get the score tally, we're gonna fade to black and show off the bad ending again. Just get 6 or less Chaos Emeralds to get this. I'm only showing the Saturn endings, by the way, despite me showing both the Genesis and Saturn openings. Just because I didn't want to play through this game twice in a row. It's already draining enough having to go for both endings at once. The only difference from there in the ending, because the credits played there and they even use the same song, is that at the end screen we'll see at the end of the video it instead says try again. Also, not for nothing, I love the bad endings music. How it transitions from sort of the happy version of the game's theme into a version of, I think that was Panic Puppet's theme, or was that the boss theme? That's pretty cool. With that said, let's go back now to the main footage and show off the true ending, where we're immediately transitioned into this area, the final zone, so to speak. Alright, so this boss is also broken up into multiple phases, but each phase only takes 1 hit, sort of, and is focused on one type of attack. This has 2 hands that fire lasers that track onto you from each of the 3 fingers, at which point the boss moves into the center and you can hit it. Phase 2 is similar to Phase 2 of the previous boss fight, where the boss will come up at either the top left or top right of the arena and fire a tracking fire beam onto you, which you can just outrun and will eventually dissipate. After I believe 3 firings of this, the boss moves into the center of the screen and you can then damage it. Phase 3 takes a bit from boss 2 of the game, Rusty Ruins. It's got hands that'll try to move into you and slam into you. The only trick this phase likes to pull is that after about, I think, 2 to 4 slams of the fists will go to the opposite extreme and try to run into you simultaneously. So one will move left, the other will move right. And the hit detection there can be a little bit iffy. Thankfully, you only need to dodge one and not both, because I can see some games doing a 1-2 sweep, but we don't have to do that here. After he does the hand sweeps, though, that's when he moves in for the damage. Phase 4 is probably the most unique phase. He's got missiles that he shoots up in the air, and they track onto your rough location, just run around the arena wildly to avoid them. After a single volley of that, he moves into the damage zone. Phase 5, the final phase, he's in one static position, and when he eventually shows up to do his attack, he fires random bouncing balls across the room like the third phase from the previous boss fight. After 2 to 4 volleys of this, he moves his head back up and into the center for a very fast damage period. But we're not done yet. That's all 5 phases, but you need to do each phase twice. So I'm going to fast forward the second volley of all these because it's the same thing. We literally just saw this. The only thing you really need to note outside of this is that you can barely hear it, but between each phase there is a bit of a timer, and you need to get onto the next platform before that timer is up, because at that point I believe either the bridge dissipates or the platform you're on dissipates and you fall and die. Either way, it's such a generous timer, it should never really cause an issue. Just watch out and get this boss done pretty quickly, because ultimately a death here is pretty costly. As once you die, if you die at any point in that fight, you need to do all 10 hits all over again. But that's game. Since we got through the final boss with all 7 Chaos Emeralds, which you can only reach this barring level select with all 7, it's time for the real ending. Love that Saturn version ending theme. And also, I should note, I don't usually like talking over vocal themes for credits, but kind of had to in this instance. Credits theme for this game is You're My Hero, performed by Debbie Morris, and I believe, as usual, written by Richard Jacques. Look it up, great song. Fits more of the Sonic R soundtrack in certain regards, and if I'm recalling, there's theories that the lyrics were meant originally for like a Sega Saturn version of Sonic CD, because it almost fits more with that game. But that's Sonic 3D Blast. It's okay. It's got some good music in both versions, and I do like the Saturn version's extra graphical fidelity things. And the Saturn version special stages are honestly really good. But the main mechanic of 3D Blast just feels very not thought out the best for what Sonic is meant to be, I guess is the way I should word this. Sonic's meant to be about going fast through challenging level design, and having you have to take your time to look for things in that just feels very counterintuitive. Again, though, that's only because it is Sonic. If this was, say, a game based around Knuckles, say if this was Knuckles Games instead of Knuckles Chaotix, I feel the game would probably be liked just a little bit better than it actually is, because I don't think it's as bad as people say it is. It's got problems, it's got some bland parts, but it's definitely playable. This is very much a prelude to the Knuckles and Rouge stages from the adventure games, but I think those are ultimately better stages, even though I don't like that mechanic too much in those games either, just because those stages are usually built more with that mechanic in mind. They're usually smaller, bit-sized pieces of bigger levels, whereas these are fully formed levels. If you want to play the game, it was on the Genesis, the Saturn, avoid the PC version at all costs, and I think it was on some of the various virtual consoles. With that said, most of the time nowadays, you're just going to find ports of the Saturn version. The Saturn version, I think, barring the same visual stuff being used in the PC version, was never reported. And I do think that's a shame, because I recommend looking up the Saturn version soundtrack. It's good stuff. I also notice a lot more of a recurring theme in its soundtrack compared to the Genesis version, at least in terms of like the leitmotifs. With that said, we at least got this game out of the way, because I'll be real, part of the reason I haven't done as much Sonic in recent years because my biggest marathon of Sonic, I think, was the Game Gear-a-thon, was because I have dreaded some of the next few games, because there's technically the Sonic 4 duology, and then there's Adventure, and Adventure 1, and Heroes. Oh, no. I don't think those games are bad by any stretch, but oh boy, they have problems. I'll get more into that when the time comes. And like I mentioned earlier, the main other difference besides the videos that play between the good and bad ending is the end screen. If you got the bad ending, like I showed off earlier, it says try again, but if you got the good ending, this screen stays on this for too long, it says the end. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, have a great night, take care, and I'll see you guys next Let's Play, whatever that may be. Might even also be on a Sega console for all you know. Could even be a bad survival horror game on a Sega console. Who knows? I might be hinting a little bit too heavily. See you guys then.